So picture the scene. It's 3:00 a.m. You're in the ICU.
Right. The highest stakes environment in medicine.
Exactly. And it's that specific kind of quiet you really only get in hospitals.
You know,
Interrupted by, the rhythmic, mechanical hissing of ventilators and the sharp beep of cardiac monitors. And the patient in bed 4 is crashing. Their systems are failing. The standard treatment protocols, they just aren't working.
It's literally life and death at that point.
It is. And in walks a researcher with a clipboard. They have a new drug, something experimental that, well, it might just work. But to use it, they need data. They need a test subject. And the only person who fits the criteria is that unconscious patient in bed 4.
And that right there is the fundamental tension of modern medicine.
It feels wrong, doesn't it, instinctively?
Oh, absolutely.
But at the same time, without clinical research in that very specific environment, medical progress basically stops dead in its tracks. I mean, we'd still be using leeches and hope.
Right, and that is the paradox. We have this desperate need to advance science to save lives, but the people we need to study the critically ill, they are the absolute least capable of protecting themselves.
Or advocating for their own rights.
Exactly.
So today, we are going to walk the tightrope between those two realities. Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at some incredible source material today from the Georgian Medical Journal, or GMJ.
Yeah, published by the Public Health Institute of Georgia.
Right, PHIG. And specifically, we are looking at a commentary piece from their audio series, the GMJ podcast. The piece is titled Ethical and Legal Framework for the Inclusion of Critically Ill Patients in Clinical Research.
And it's written by Professor Georgi Kakadze.
Yeah.
MD, MPH, PhD.
Quite the credentials.
Yeah, he really knows his stuff. And this is a really significant piece of analysis. What Professor Kakadze has done here is he bridges the gap between high-minded international ethics.
It's like the philosophy of do no harm.
Right, that abstract stuff. And he connects it to the gritty, specific legal statutes actually on the books in Georgia.
Which is what drew me to this in the first place. It is not just abstract theory. It's about what legally happens when you are in that hospital bed. So our mission today is to unpack this safety net. We want to know, when you can't say no, who says it for you?
And why is the system designed to make it so hard to say yes?
Right. Let's get into segment 1, the vulnerability paradox. Because when I was reading the source material, I got stuck on this definition of critically ill. I mean, obviously, if you're in the ICU, you're sick. But the article frames it as a state of heightened vulnerability.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction. It is distinct from just being a patient. Because think about it, if you break your leg, you're in pain, sure.
Yeah.
But you can still process information. You can ask the doctor, hey, what are the side effects of this painkiller? You can weigh the pros and cons.
I can negotiate. I have agency.
Exactly. But in the critical care context, that capacity is just entirely stripped away. The source's introduction highlights that this vulnerability really comes from two places. First, the physiological side. The illness itself might be affecting your brain. Sepsis does that, for example. Or you might just be heavily sedated.
So you physically cannot comprehend a complex consent form.
Right. But then there's a second layer.
Because even if I'm awake, the article suggests I'm still vulnerable.
Yes, the situational vulnerability. You have to think about the power dynamic in that room. You are completely dependent on the medical staff for your survival, literally for the air in your lungs.
Wow.
So if the doctor standing over you, the one keeping you alive, suggests a study, do you really feel free to refuse?
Probably not. I mean, you wouldn't want to upset the person holding the keys to your survival.
Precisely. That is coercion, even if it is completely unintentional on the doctor's part.
Wow.
But the GMJ commentary digs even deeper into a specific psychological trap that I think is just fascinating. It's called therapeutic misconception.
Right. I highlighted this. Therapeutic misconception. It sounds super academic, but when you actually break it down, it's kind of heartbreaking.
It really is. It's a cognitive error. Patients, or more likely in the ICU, their frantic family members, they fail to distinguish between clinical research and medical treatment.
So they see the researcher not as a scientist testing a hypothesis, but as a doctor offering a cure.
Exactly. They see the words experimental drug, and their panicked brain translates it to miracle drug.
Right.
They don't hear the part about placebo control or unknown side effects. They just hear hope.
It's the Hail Mary pass. Like, if we just sign this piece of paper, we get the special medicine.
And that is incredibly dangerous, because if you consent to a study thinking it is a guaranteed therapy, you haven't actually given informed consent. You have consented to a fantasy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Kakadze argues that this makes the vulnerability contextual and relational. It isn't just that the patient is physically weak. It's that their desperation and their family's desperation blinds them to the reality of the risk.
Okay, so if the patient can't think straight and the family is blinded by hope, how do we ethically justify running a study at all? I mean, why not just completely ban research in the ICU?
Well, because then we would never improve ICU care. The mortality rate would just never drop.
We'd be stuck.
Right. So instead of a ban, we have a filter. A very, very tight filter. Which brings us to segment 2. The 7 pillars of ethical research.
Yeah, so the source material references these international standards, right? The Declaration of Helsinki.
And the guidelines from the Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences, CIOMs.
Right, and it all funnels into this thing called the Emanuel Wendler Grady Framework, which frankly sounds like a law firm you'd hire to get out of a messy divorce.
It really does have that ring to it. But it is actually a rigorous checklist used globally to determine if a study is fundamentally ethical. The GMJ commentary lists 7 requirements for this framework.
Let's walk through them. I notice they start with the science itself, not the patient.
Right. Social value and scientific validity. Before you even look at a patient, you have to prove the study is actually worth doing.
Is the hypothesis sound, basically?
Exactly. Will the results actually help people? If the science is sloppy, the ethics are automatically void. You cannot expose a dying patient to risk for bad science.
That seems like a pretty low bar, but I guess plenty of bad studies get proposed.
You would be very surprised. So then you move to fair subject selection. And this is where the G&J source drops what I call the hard rule.
I highlighted this too. It's about who you pick. The article says you can't just use ICU patients because they're convenient.
This is critical. The inclusion of critically ill patients is only justifiable if the research question absolutely cannot be answered using less vulnerable populations.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I understand. So if I'm testing a new antibiotic that works on pneumonia,
Okay.
I cannot test it on the unconscious guy in the ICU just because he's already in a hospital bed and, easier to monitor.
No, absolutely not. If you can get that data from a conscious walking around patient with mild pneumonia, you must do that.
Wow.
You only enter the ICU when the disease itself is the target. Like testing a drug for septic shock that only happens in the ICU. Necessity is the only key that unlocks the door to that vulnerable population. Convenience is never an excuse.
So it's about the exhaustion of alternatives.
Exactly. Then you have the favorable risk-benefit ratio. The potential good must outweigh the bad. An independent ethical review.
Meaning someone totally outside your team has to say it's okay.
Right. And finally, the big one we keep circling back to, informed consent and respect for participants.
Which is obviously the hardest pillar to uphold when the patient is in a coma.
Very much so.
And this is where the theory hits the pavement, right? The GMJ podcast in the article, they don't just talk about international norms like Helsinki, they drill down into the very specific laws of Georgia. Which brings us to segment 3, the Georgian regulatory perspective.
Yeah, and this is what makes this source material so valuable. For listeners in the region, or really anyone interested in comparative law, Georgia isn't operating on some loose gentleman's agreement. These ethics are hard-coded into state statutes.
And the article mentions that Georgia's legislation fully aligns with international standards. So no local shortcuts.
No shortcuts whatsoever. The foundation here is the law on patients' rights. That dates back to the year 2000.
Okay.
And it establishes informed consent as a strict prerequisite for any medical intervention, research included.
Does it have an exception clause? Like, unless the patient is really, really sick?
The source is explicit about this. There are no exceptions for critical illness in the basic right to consent. The right exists whether you are awake or not.
Okay, but if I have the right, but I can't exercise it because I'm unconscious, does the research just stop?
Well, this is where the legal machinery gets pretty technical. We have specific decrees. Governmental Decree number 335 from 2019, which regulates clinical trials for pharmacological products.
So drugs.
Drugs, right. And Decree number 386 from 2023 for medical devices. Both of these require prior state authorization and ethics committee approval. But to solve your consent problem, the law uses a proxy.
A proxy. Okay, so like my wife or my lawyer.
Yes, a legal representative. But the GMJ commentary makes a really vital distinction here regarding the duty of that proxy.
It isn't just a rubber stamp.
Far from it. When your wife signs that form, she isn't just giving her permission, she is legally assuming a heightened duty to act in your best interest.
What does that actually mean in practice, though?
It means she has to stand in your shoes. She has to ask, would he want this? Does this offer him a chance at recovery? If the study offers no direct benefit to you.
Like if it's purely to gather data for future patients.
Exactly. If it's just for data, the legal and ethical bar for her to say yes is astronomically high.
So she can't just sign it to be helpful to the nice doctor with the clipboard.
Absolutely not. Her role is protective, not facilitative. The law views the proxy as the absolute final shield for the patient.
It's interesting that the law places that much burden on a family member. I mean, that is a lot of pressure in an already terrifying situation.
It is a lot of pressure. But it's better than the alternative, which is the state or the doctor just deciding for you.
True. Now, I want to push on the system a bit because we have established the rules are tight, the filters are in place. But let's play the Hollywood scenario. Segment 4, the no exceptions policy.
I have a feeling I know exactly where this is going.
You know the scene, the Grey's Anatomy moment, the patient is dying, the experimental drug is locked in a cabinet down the hall, the paperwork would take 48 hours to clear the ethics committee, so the maverick doctor breaks the glass, gives the drug, and saves the patient.
Right.
And the audience, we all cheer. But what does Professor Kakazi and the Georgian Medical Journal say about that doctor?
The GMJ says that doctor is a massive liability. And the source is very definitive here. It actually states, quote, "The severity of illness does not justify relaxation of safeguards. Rather, it intensifies the obligation."
Intensifies the obligation. That is a really strong counterargument to the whole emergency mindset.
It is, because the logic is that if we allow emergency exceptions to bypass ethics review, we start a slide down a very slippery slope. Suddenly, every single study is framed as an emergency. Oh, we have to test this right now, or the chance is gone. You simply cannot build a robust ethical system on loopholes.
Okay, but let's say he does it anyway. He breaks the rules, gives the drug, and the patient makes a miraculous recovery. Surely the result justifies the method.
Nope.
Really?
The source material hits us with a concept here that I think is absolutely crucial for you, the listener, to understand. That research, even if successful, is considered scientifically invalid.
Invalid, but the patient is alive.
The patient is alive, yes, but the data is dead.
Wow.
The global scientific community, the major journals, regulatory bodies like the FDA or the EMA, they will not accept data generated without ethical oversight. It is fruit from the poisonous tree.
So you can't publish it. You can't use it to get the drug approved for other people.
Exactly. You might have saved one person and broken the law to do it, but you have destroyed the opportunity to prove the efficacy of that drug for the millions of other people who might need it, because the data is tainted.
That is a perspective I had completely not considered. It isn't just about being, morally good. It's about the actual utility of the science.
And it's about reputation. The source lists the institutional consequences for ignoring these rules. Sure, there are administrative fines. There's legal liability under Georgian law. But the real damage is to Georgia's credibility as a research environment.
Right, because if Georgia wants to be a major player in international medical research, they can't be seen as the Wild West.
Exactly. Major pharmaceutical companies and top-tier research universities, they operate on a global standard. If they perceive that a country plays fast and loose with ethics, that they skip the Helsinki guidelines, they just stop calling.
They pull out.
They pull their funding. They pull their international collaboration.
So, adhering to these strict laws, Decree 335, the law on personal data protection from 2011, it's actually a strategic national interest.
Absolutely. Compliance isn't just administrative red tape. It is the admission ticket to the global scientific community.
That really flips the script for me. I think a lot of people view ethics committees as the Department of No. A bunch of bureaucrats just slowing down the cure. But the way Professor Picazzi frames it...
It's not a hurdle. It's a foundation.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up. We've looked at the intense vulnerability of the ICU patient. We've covered the therapeutic misconception. We walked through the 7 pillars of the framework, the rigid Georgian statutes, and the severe consequences of breaking them. What is the big picture here? Why does this matter to the person driving to work right now who isn't a doctor or a researcher?
It matters because of trust. The entire field of public health relies completely on the public trusting the health system.
That makes sense.
Because if people start to believe that checking into a hospital means you automatically become a guinea pig, that your human rights just disappear the second you're sedated, they will stop seeking care.
Right. They'd rather stay home and risk it than go to a place they don't trust.
Exactly. These rigid frameworks we've discussed today, the paperwork, the proxies, the independent committees, they aren't there to annoy researchers. They are there to maintain the social contract between the public and medicine. We strictly protect the rights of the vulnerable few in order to maintain the trust of the many.
That is the bottom line. It's the why behind all the what.
Precisely.
Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We've been discussing critically ill patients as one big monolithic category today, but in the limitations section of the source material, the author dropped a little breadcrumb that really got my gears turning.
Oh, the future complications angle.
Exactly. The analysis focused on critically ill adults as a general group, but it made me wonder, how does this ethical framework hold up when we start slicing the population even thinner? Like, what about critically ill children? The legal status of a child is already entirely different.
Right. Or patients with severe dementia who also happen to be critically ill. Their baseline vulnerability is already so much higher before they even get to the ICU.
And here is the real sci-fi curveball. What happens when we start using artificial intelligence to identify trial candidates?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if an AI analyzes your chart and tells the doctor you are the quote-unquote perfect subject, does that introduce a totally new kind of bias or coercion?
That is the billion-dollar question right there. As medicine becomes more personalized and heavily automated, these ethical frameworks from 2000 and 2019 are going to be severely tested. Do we need a whole new set of rules for the age of AI? Probably.
It's definitely a moving target, but if you want to understand the bedrock of where we stand today, you really need to read the source material. It's in the Georgian Medical Journal, ISSN 30884322.
And seriously, you should check out the GMJ podcast audio series, too. They do an incredible job of taking these dense, legalistic topics and making them accessible to anyone. It is a great resource if you want to understand the machinery behind the medicine.
Absolutely. It is rare to find a source that explains the law without putting you to sleep.
It was a real pleasure unpacking this one today.
Thanks for listening. Keep asking the hard questions, and remember, sometimes the red tape is the only thing holding the system together. We'll see you on the next deep dive.